Right, and that's the cue to let everyone know that we are recording this. So let us know if you, and then we do have the after party thing too, where we
Which
can
is not recorded.
and then we can really talk about things. So
Yeah, then you can let us know how you really feel. But yeah, so welcome everybody to the Power Lunch. We have an interesting show today. We actually have Shannon Kane, right?
Keen,
Keen.
like peachy keen.
I was thinking Chicago Kane. Sorry about that.
No, no worries.
Hockey
No worries.
family, you know. Sorry,
No
sorry
worries.
about that. But she's actually direct from Microsoft, so she's from the Borg, the source, the mothership. She will give us the hoedown on the lowdown about Azure and help us understand the questions that we might have. And I will say, Shannon, that this is one of the big questions that I get asked a lot, just in general about Azure and stuff. So I think this is a very timely discussion for us to have. The format is relatively informal. You probably picked up on that from me. And my approach.
I honestly like those better than these rigorous, you talk for 10 minutes and then you have 5 minutes of questions and then you're done. And it's like, I have to cram 10 minutes of thought into 10 minutes. That's hard. That's hard.
Yeah. So I mean, we'll have you talk for a little bit, kind of informally, then we'll ask some questions and interact that way. And like I said, we try to shoot for about 20-30 minutes ish of conversation and witty banter. And then we'll go into the we call it the after show, and we'll shut off the recording, and that's when we really learn stuff. just kidding. So with that, Shannon, I'll hand it over to you. And also, we do not have a giveaway today. Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. We do not have a giveaway today, so just enjoy your Subway sandwich for the Power Lunch meal. So, yeah, with that, Shannon, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, your experiences, and then get into Azure.
Sure. So my name is Shannon Keen. I'm a senior cloud advocate at Microsoft. And in our roles, we work on community outreach. I specifically focus a lot of my time on the Azure VMware solution product line. And I don't know if you want me to share. I've got some slides. Let's see. Oh, are you able to? I just tried sharing. It won't let me share.
Try it right now. See if it'll let you.
Perfect.
Yeah, there we go.
Awesome. So I'm sure everybody's familiar with VMware. I'm sure you're relatively familiar with Azure. This is an interesting moment where we have joined the two together and we really are meeting sysadmins where they are. I think Microsoft's always done a really good job of meeting developers where they are. We haven't done as good of a job as at meeting administrators where they are. So I always think this is that nice union of sysadmins who might have a very hefty VMware environment, and they may have to think about a cloud transformation journey into Azure. So these are all of the great ways to reach me. I'm very active on Twitter. I'm also on LinkedIn. Feel free to connect if you've got questions, if you want to be glued into the right teams to help you make this be a reality within your world. Always happy to do that. Let's see if I can, there we go. So let's talk a little bit about the intro and the background. So there are a lot of different migration triggers at the present time, and we've seen this be kind of sped up with COVID, right? So there's the need for speed, there's the cost and complexity considerations, as well as the people and processes components. So that's everything from software and hardware end of life cycle, urgent capacity needs, center contract expirations, things like project costs, resource and timelines, application refactoring or re-architecting. That is always what takes the biggest amount of time. And that's what prevents that need for speed. There's always this whole notion of we have to refactor to split up this monolithic application. You don't now, which is awesome. And then you can think about using Azure VMware Solution for business continuity and to make sure that there is no downtime as you migrate workloads from on-prem into Azure. I often talk a lot about this as well. So I think a lot of enterprises were freaked out with this whole notion of cloud. They had to embrace IaaS out the gate, all these different nuances, different terms, things that they weren't familiar with. The beauty of Azure VMware Solution is you take that platform, you put it into Azure. It's the same VMware platform that we've all known for a really long period of time. You won't actually say the amount of time because it varies, right? A lot of us have done it for years and years and years. Some of us haven't done it for the same amount of time. But the beauty is it's that gold standard that I think enterprises really love. And then you can think about bringing your operational best practices, and then you can grow that cloud competency at a time that makes the most sense to you. So this is an interesting fusion of sorts related to how Microsoft has embraced VMware in the past. So in the past, you'd think of them as being direct competitors. Now everybody's playing in the same sandbox. We are actually embracing this partnership at a very great pace. There's a lot of innovation that's happening within the engineering teams. So this really allows you to run your native VMware workloads on Azure. So customers can now migrate VMs from on-premises into Azure using HCX and vMotion, really awesome technologies. I think once I figured out what vMotion was, I kind of my jaw just dropped. Well, now you can think about using that same technology and migrating your VMs from on-prem into Azure. And everything lands on that hypervisor you know and you love and you trust and you just can't get enough of, right? So it's VMware in the cloud. So customers can now seamlessly run, manage, and secure their applications and also bring those best practices into Azure without having to freak out about all of the change, right? So I've spent a lot of time working with customers prior to my current role, and there was always this level of anxiety, my roles being obsolete. I don't have any validity as time moves forward. How can I see myself move forward? And the idea here is to freak out less and realize that there's now a platform that you and your company could choose to have workloads kind of land on inside of Azure. So the iteration we're on right now is different than the first go round. The first go round was Azure VMware Solution by Cloud Simple. Now it's just Azure VMware Solution. This service GA'd last September. It was available in US East, West, Europe West, and Australia. As of now, look at the footprint, right? It's all over, and there are more regions coming online. So dependent upon what your operational style is, where your offices are located, you could think about deploying AVS in a number of different regions and then use the Azure backbone to help you kind of tie things together from a networking perspective. So these are kind of the use cases, right? So it's data center expansion, reduction or retirement, speed and simplification of migration into kind of that hybrid cloud model, disaster recovery and business continuity, app and business modernization. So you've got maybe an idea here where you could take your developers and they could start making use of services like Azure Active Directory, things that you wouldn't have thought of prior to now, because you're not having to embrace all of Azure. You're not having to drink from that ridiculous fire hose, right? You can take apart what you need, and your developers tend to like that reality versus kind of central IT sort of stopping the whole process. We always recommend planning and deploying, right? So there's a lot of great tooling that will assess your environment as exists on-prem right now. And then you can go ahead and create the ABS software-defined data center environment from the portal in just a few hours. So that's kind of a cool reality. From there, the migration patterns really are the sweet spot. You get a chance to take those VMs on-prem, migrate them into Azure. So if you're getting out of your data center colo contract, you don't want to have to worry about end of life maintenance and support for your hardware. You want to get out of that sort of CapEx model more into an OpEx model. That's where this starts to become a really compelling conversation. So it's kind of cool in the sense that it's using HCX, which is Hybrid Cloud Exchange. And that's the appliance that takes your VM from on-prem and moves it into Azure. And dependent upon the version of vSphere you're on, it could be a live migration, it could be a cold migration or a bulk migration. Those are all three supported migration patterns, but I think the live one is the coolest. Then, you've got the Microsoft, I guess, cloud native components, right? So you've got the elasticity of the cloud. You've got all of the different Azure services. You've got all the different networking, compute, storage. I mean, the sky is the limit, right? It's kind of like achievement unlocked. That's always the joke I make. It reminds me of when you beat a really hard level in a video game, you get the achievement unlocked. That's kind of what this becomes. And then you can also think about using your VMware tooling. So the native vSphere experience exists in Azure. There's certain things you can't control, and that's just because of the fact that we are providing this as a service to you. So you couldn't control your ESXi hosts, right? But Microsoft will control that, and Microsoft will manage it for you. So you can think about controlling the sides of things that are a little bit more interesting, I feel. You can think about using vSAN for storage, NSXT for networking, and then HCX for migration. This also helps you related to the kind of 1.0 of your cloud transformation, moving it to 2.0, 3.0, et cetera, because we'll support this for indefinitely, right? There's no line in the sand, a year down the road, we're going to stop supporting this. No, the idea is we now have a platform for a lot of enterprises to take the skills, the tooling that they've invested in over the years and move it into Azure. So I think, a lot of folks have seen this visual here. Usually it's Azure in the middle. Well, think about this. You've got the ability to secure, protect, monitor, configure, and govern your environment using Azure VMware Solutions. So if you think about it, Azure VMware Solution can now be that central focus point for your operational best practices. And you can extend what you need to do and integrate with all the Azure services kind of on that front.
Yeah, you'll be here shortly. I'm just getting in Oakwood. I gotta go back.
So let's talk a little bit about the new and differentiated features, because we did have a first go round of this. If you ever hear Cloud Simple, that was the first attempt at Azure VMware Solution. It's still supported. So if you do have it or you know of a firm that has it, that will be supported until there's no more Cloud Simple customers. But if you're a net new customer, the recommendation is to go the route, excuse me, of what GA'd last September. So it's a first-party Azure service. It's cloud certified by VMware. There's a seamless Azure experience and there's native integration. So that's a really cool, compelling thing. You don't have to pick apart and learn the different solutions. You can learn them as your environment moves into Azure. We've got the hybrid use benefit licensing for Windows and SQL Server, which is really awesome. So you don't have to pay the Windows license costs to run your VMs inside of AVS. And then we've got the free extended security updates for Windows Server 2008, 2008 R2, SQL Server 2008 and 2008 R2. Dawned on me that doesn't show up in the slide. I'll have to fix that. But it's all of your older flavors of Windows Server and SQL Server. You get the free security updates going the route of placing this inside of Azure. The latest VMware technology updates show up as well. Now, it's always going to be N-1 in terms of the version. So right now, there's a lot of testing for vSphere 7.0, and I'll talk about this in one of the next couple of slides here. We're on 6.7 update 3. And because we're doing this for a number of customers, there's a lot of validation that has to go through this. So the headaches and pain points are now falling on Microsoft rather than you, to make sure that your environment is sustainable and reliable, and then most importantly, up. You've got the HCX Enterprise Edition is available. It's eventually it will show up by default. Right now is HCX Advanced, which supports up to 3 site pairings. The Enterprise Edition allows, I think it's up to 10. So that's kind of a feature that it's in public preview right now. It will roll into full-blown GA at some point soon. These are dedicated hosts to you. That's the cool thing. So when you go and you specify you want AVS, you get 3 nodes. They are dedicated to you. Those are your servers, and they live in an Azure data center. You've got the unified licensing and consumption models. So you go to the same spot to take a look at everything rather than going into one portal here, one portal there. So Cloud Simple had multiple portals. This is all integrated into the same portal. So you get the same features that you would if you were spinning up IaaS VMs or any app service plans or anything networking, right? And then there's a simplified NSX interface as well. So a lot of customers embraced NSX at different points, and then customers also chose not to embrace NSX. These are really for the customers who didn't embrace NSX. They can actually think about using the Azure portal to configure those sides of things. So it's 6.7 Update 3 Enterprise Plus for the ESXi flavor, 6.7 Update 3 Standard for vCenter. These are kind of the flavors right now. If you were to deploy AVS, this is what you would get. It's 1 SKU. Right now, it's the AV36. These are the hardware specifications on the right, and that's kind of what you get out the gate. This service will evolve. There eventually will be other SKUs to think through, but right now, this is where we're at. And it's an hourly pay-as-you-go billing plan, so on kind of a 1-year and 3-year reserved instance. So if you really want to think about cost savings and you are going to run AVS for a lengthy period of time, you can think about building out reserved instances, and you can reduce the hourly costs for your AVS environment. The big piece here, though, is it requires a minimum of 3 nodes. You can add single nodes as required, but you can't go lower than 3 nodes. And that's just because of the fact of the N+1 sort of scenario that we like to try and build environments off of. I won't spend too much time on that because we kind of already touched on that. So I'll talk a little bit about the deployment process. So, it's just like any other Azure service. You go into the portal, you have to open up a ticket with support, and they'll account for hosts inside of the subscription that you've kind of tied to your AVS environment. You'll specify the resource group, the location, you'll specify the resource name, the SKU, The address block, so it requires a /22 CIDR network that it ingests. This is only really used in the AVS environment. And then you tie it to an Azure virtual network. So the situation here is interesting in the sense that these are bare metal servers that come with an express route circuit. That express route circuit is what peers it into Azure, and that's what gives you all of the Azure goodies. So, you'll want to think about creating an Azure Bastion with a jump host. You could also just create a jump host with just-in-time access into that VM, so you don't have public IPs accessible that are out there. So, in order to see this environment once it's deployed, you need another server to go hit the website, unfortunately. I wish it was a little bit more straightforward, like you could pull it up into the browser itself. I suspect this will evolve over time, but right now you have to deploy a jump host to go in and access the web GUI like you would if it was in your on-prem environment. So in order for the express route to be peered into Azure, you need to create an auth key, and you need to have a VNet gateway show up in the virtual network. And then you connect the express route to the VNet gateway.
Shannon, do the current VMware licenses move to Azure, or would new licenses need to be purchased?
Good question. So you get, you get
Pat Becker. Thank you, Pat.
Yeah. So you get vSphere, you get vCenter, vSAN, let's see, HCX, right? So you get all of those out the gate. You can BYOL for vRealize, you can BYOL for Site Recovery Manager, but you get those out the gate. So you don't have to worry about restructuring your licensing components with VMware. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of an idea. And then I suspect this is going to continue to mature. So there's a lot of conversations with a number of the third-party vendors that everybody's familiar with. There's Veeam integration, Zerto integration. I think there's some Commvault integration and some Veritas integration. Where they are at right now, I'm not exactly sure, but I know those are all of the major vendors that are building things surrounding AVS and the integration with AVS. Let's see here. I'm gonna dawned on me hang on 2 seconds here. My robot turned on my vacuum, and so it's making a ton of noise in the background. Hopefully you can't hear it, but I'm just gonna stop it real quick here. There we go. Okay. So because it's kind of distracting to me, so hopefully you didn't hear it. Anyway, so I'll keep going here. So once you connect to the jump host behind the Azure Bastion, you can connect to vCenter, you can connect to your NSXT manager. In order to have your on-prem environment be routable from a traffic perspective, so you can handle those vMotion migrations into Azure, you need an express route circuit of your own with private peering into Azure. And so what happens is, because there's no east-west routing inside the express route components, you need to enable global reach. Global reach is the overarching service that allows routes to be transferred from one express route circuit to another. So you enable global reach for the on-prem access, and then you would configure the on-prem environment with like VMware Identity Manager, or you'd configure single sign-on. So then you have the full functionality of vSphere in Azure. When it comes to the management components, it's really the same environment, right? I have all these conversations and people are so excited to see the service, and I'm prepared to show it if we get to that point, but it is just VMware on Azure, right? So you've got operational consistency for admins. You can continue to use the VMware resources that you've invested in over time. You've got access to vSphere, HCX, NSXT. Those are enabled during the deployment process, and the credentials are registered in Azure. And I'll showcase that as well, because literally up until almost about a month ago, you had to specify the password for both NSX and vCenter. You don't have to anymore. That's all handled within the portal itself. And then you copy those credentials and paste them into the browser. When you created it on your own, you had to open up a ticket every 90 days to reset your password. And I think that was slightly cumbersome for our support teams. And that's why we have done this a little bit differently with the deployment. It's the seamless management as well. So you can scale your infrastructure over here. And I need to probably do this slide a little bit differently, but if you can see, it's as simple as going in here, clicking on the ellipses and editing and adding additional hosts. I can't even describe to you how seamless that feels, given the fact that I spent a lot of my tech career focused on vSphere upgrades on-prem, and that would take forever. You'd have to load the server up, connect everything up, make sure it was on the right VLAN, make sure that it was connected to the right switch, and then you had to kind of boot up and build out, ESXi. This is all built up, for you without having to worry about it. And it takes about, I think it's about 15 to 20 minutes to add a new cluster in, which just blows my mind. So it takes about 2.5 hours to deploy, and then about 15 to 20 minutes to add an additional host. And that's pretty awesome considering vSphere upgrades used to take me many months. I had one that took closer to a year because there was a lot of squirrely stuff we didn't understand about the environment because I worked for a managed services provider. But realizing it's now going down to hours and minutes versus months and possibly a year is a really compelling story, I think, to a lot of enterprises right now. So you can add those nodes more, during kind of peak times. You can build out automation. So there is tooling right now that can build some of that out for you. And you can trigger it, to happen manually. You can trigger it on demand. It's kind of a cool reality. The math is called out here on the slide. So it's a minimum of 3 nodes per cluster. It's a maximum of 16 nodes in a vSphere cluster. And actually this changed. It's a maximum of 96 nodes now in an Azure private cloud instance. So I do need to update those slides. My apologies. But that was a more recent update. And that's kind of an awesome story, I think, for our enterprises that are considering a heftier VMware stack that they're moving into Azure. I like this slide a lot because it focuses on the division of responsibility. So I don't know if you're like me, but I like to get less texts and phone calls and emails at 2 a.m. And this model really allows for that. So Microsoft will handle everything at the host level. So power, cabling, cooling, all of the above, right? Patching. That's all Microsoft. You get to focus on the cooler sides of administering an environment, which is the guest OS, the applications that are running on top, the virtual machines, lifecycle management, any of the configuration best practices. Maybe you're an Ansible shop. Maybe you're thinking about leaning on Puppet more and more. You can think about extending that into Azure VMware solution, and it's kind of a cool reality. It really tells the tale to a lot of our enterprises in a very interesting way. So they like to see this slide quite a bit. And then just the idea that Microsoft is handling more of it for you. It's a nice, I guess, breath of fresh air. If I think about this from my formative life where I just was, hoping that I wouldn't get bugged at 2 a.m. So Microsoft will handle all of those massive headaches for you, and you get to focus on some of the more cooler things that you get to focus on, trying to keep your environment up, resilient, et cetera. So we'll talk a little bit about the network architecture. So the network connectivity is probably the hardest to talk about because so we do networking in a very interesting way. There's a number of different layers involved and we abstract it for you. The same thing exists here because we've got an express route circuit that gets deployed with ABS. And then you need to peer that into Azure to even use Azure services with ABS. From there, you need to think about an express route on-prem, tying itself into Azure with private peering and then enabling global reach. But there are 2 different flavors of this. There's the basic interconnectivity. So if you only needed network connectivity into Azure, that's what this diagram would showcase. You would have the express route peer itself into Azure, and then you get access to all the Azure services like Azure Security Center, Azure Monitor, Azure Active Directory, et cetera. That's not what most customers deploy. What they'll deploy is the full interconnectivity model, which is where you enable that global reach from on-prem. So you can kind of see it here, right? You've got your ABS network, and that's really handled by the ABS environment. Then you've got your Azure VNet. That's what essentially gets linked to the ABS instance through the express route peering. And then in order for the on-prem environment to see Azure and then also be able to route and migrate VMs into ABS, you need that express route circuit to handle the migration pattern. Now, let's say it takes forever to get express route because that does happen, right? You could also think about building out a site-to-site VPN, kind of in a POC, right? You want to get familiar with that migration pattern. You want to see what it's like. I never know why it takes telco so long to get some of these lines, but I have had customers who've waited months and months and months, and it wound up in some queue that nobody realized. And then it's a matter of, then they kind of start the whole cycle over again. So in the event that happens, this is sort of a POC type supported way of migrating. The thing here to really call out is VMware won't guarantee an SLA over an IPsec VPN tunnel because it's going over the internet, right? They want it over dark fiber. So that's why the express route would be probably the recommended pattern for your production workloads. But if you had dev test staging environments, you could spin up a site-to-site VPN and you'd have that functionality to think through a migration pattern. So let's talk a little bit about the migration. I'm doing okay on time here. So you can assess the Azure VMware environment, like I had talked about. That's always the recommended pattern. You never quite know what you have. Then you would identify the workloads to migrate. You would define the migration pattern with HCX. So live is 6.0 and newer. Bulk and cold are going to be your older flavors of vSphere. So anything in the 5.x era. And that still exists, even though some of them have reached end of life. Those are still kind of in the wild, so to speak. You can think about migrating those workloads in, but you don't have the same flexibility of a live migration. Then you think about the steps to reach full production. You go through that testing and validation phase. There's a way to engage a Microsoft team to come in and help. So there are, they're called the global black belts, and they come in and they help out the field sales teams that you might be familiar with working on projects. So they'll help them out. You'll go through the whole process of getting everything connected, configured. You'll do a design session prior to anything even kind of hitting the ground running, so to speak. And then you'll think about, just starting to maybe move over the low-hanging fruit. Once you transition to production, that's where you think about the at-scale migration and adoption. We've got Microsoft Fast Track as an option. We also have, I think, Microsoft MCS, Microsoft Consulting Services is another resource, as well as we have a very vast partner network. And we've been working with them to upskill and make sure that they can handle these migration patterns. Or if you're savvy enough and you've got a lot of VMware skills, you could always take that on yourself. But I think sometimes when you've got help, extra help, it happens a little bit faster. As of Ignite back in March, so because of COVID, we ran Ignite twice. As of Ignite in March, Azure Migrate can now, it reached GA. So it was in public preview as of the GA with this iteration of ABS. It's now at GA for all of your on-prem assessments. So it will also do an ABS assessment. And that's really helpful because of the fact that you can think about assessing your VMs that they wanted to land on IaaS. You can think about assessing your databases, your app services, your RDS environments, right? So there's a lot of things that Azure Migrate does, and you can think about it also doing an additional assessment so it lands on ABS. HCX is the migration tool. So that's where you can do the bulk migration, the live migration, the cold migration. It also handles any vSphere to vSphere migration. So it's very multi-pronged. If you don't have it, it's definitely something to evaluate with VMware and your internal teams. It'll handle vSphere 5.0 to any kind of current version. There's a little bit of nuances when you think about the version of HCX that's running inside of ABS. There's a little bit of compatibility you have to think about if you're running one of those older environments, and that's when leaning on the Microsoft team to come in and help would probably make a lot of sense. There is the HCX for site peering and DR. So you want to set up those site peerings, or sorry, site pairings. I'm thinking of all the express route peering as well. So you want to set up the site pairing. You can think about parallel VM migration threads. The migration pattern into Azure then becomes a little faster. You can use HCX to kind of extend the layer 2 network if you needed to and keep the same IP addresses. So everything outside of this HCX conversation really shouldn't overlap, but in the event it needs to, you can think about leaning on HCX to handle that network overlap. It'll allow the layer 2 network to be extended into Azure. It also provides the secure proxy for vMotion and replication traffic as well. So how are we on time? Do you want me just to kind of walk through what this looks like? Because I suspect there's a lot of interest.
Yeah, I mean, I would like to see a demo. We're all right on time.
Okay. I just rattled on through it, so I was like, "Woo!"
That's we got to keep plowing through it. But I do think there's interest in seeing a demo, even if I'm just speaking selfishly.
Yeah. So so let's do this. So now I've already deployed it, but this is kind of the way that you would deploy it. I know you'd see Azure feed. I don't know why it didn't. Here, let's try something else here. Try it again. There we go. I should have just waited. It's just like every other resource. Make sure it's in the right. I think this is the one. Now, granted, I've already deployed it. And if you haven't gone through the notion of opening up that ticket with support, this will remind you to do it. You essentially have to have hosts allocated. And because we're doing this on bare metal servers, our teams that are involved with capacity management, they just have to know about the fact that you're interested in moving forward with an ABS environment. So I've got this here. It's in North Central. This is where you'd provide the name. So we'll just put test ABS. Oops, can't have a space. It won't load the SKU here, but there's only one SKU, and I've already deployed it. It takes 2.5 hours to redeploy, so I won't go through this process. It's hopefully showing you how simple it is, though, to set up. This is where you plug in your address box. I think I did like a 10.5.0.0/22. You tie it to an existing virtual network if you want to. This has a gateway subnet. That's what it requires. That's where the express route connections happen. Or you could leave it blank and you could do the peerings after the fact. It really depends upon what you want. Then you hit review and create. It's super simple. I am actually shocked at how simple it's become. So let's go back here into my environment. So this is what I've deployed, right? And you see over here, this is the primary peering subnet, secondary peering subnet. This is the management network, essentially. So think of that as the /22 I use to build out the environment. It's just like every other Azure environment as well. You get your activity log, your access control, your tags. These are more so for the Azure kind of resource itself. This is all the lock. So if there was a lock involved, it doesn't have a lock, but this is a great way to ensure that somebody doesn't go in here and accidentally delete something with automation. This is your connectivity blade. So this is the vMotion network. I think this would probably, I'm using Azure Mask to kind of blur some of this out here because it's some sensitive info. But if I were to paste it in here, that's your vMotion network. That's the private cloud management. So it's all within that /22 network. This is the express route ID, the private peering ID, and this is the auth key that gets created for you if you specify the virtual network when you create it. Now, if you don't, you can always request one and use it. This I have not yet plugged into an environment. I don't have another express route circuit to enable global reach on, but I had to create a bunch of documentation that showcased how simple it was to just request an authorization key. You provide a name and you hit create. A couple of seconds later, it shows up here. This is the HCX. Remember, advanced is deployed by default. If you need enterprise, you can add it on with a support ticket. Eventually, that will show up within this deployment model. So they're going through the testing and validation, so that'll allow kind of more comprehensive management or migration patterns. So this is the HCX Cloud Manager IP, right? This is where you would specify a public IP if you need anything routable with a public IP. Maybe there's a workload that has a public IP that needs to be accessible over port 80. You'd need to have a public IP here and then work on natting inside of NSXT Manager so that everybody, who's hitting that environment knows where it needs to go and you can access it internally and externally. This is where you configure your global reach. This is where you'd add your on-prem connection, right? I don't have anything set up because I don't have an express route instance to connect to, but it's pretty straightforward in that regard. This is your identity. So this is the web client URL. So I'll kind of showcase some of what that looks like here. That's where I would go to, and it would look just like vCenter. The admin username, it's just, I think it's just cloud admin. Yep. This is the admin password. Notice how all you can do is copy it to the clipboard. Super cool. Same with the NSXT credentials. You've got your NSXT, and this is all done for you by way of that 2.5-hour deployment. So you don't have to worry about it. Microsoft will do all of that through all of the great automation tooling that we have. And then the admin username for HCX is just admin, I believe. Yep. So, and then you can think about, this is a certificate thumbprint if you need it, if you want to make sure that, you don't get the error message when you try and go to HTTPS and it says, do you trust the authority of this certificate? This is the clusters blade. Always takes a little bit of time. I never know why. If this doesn't load, I'll just kind of keep moving on through here. But that's that. Yeah, this is where you would go in and edit the cluster. So you could add. Should just, it may not because I don't have additional. Yeah, so I only have capacity to do 3, but it's as simple as moving it this way. And if you need to open up more, you just need to open up that quota increase ticket. This is kind of the secret sauce. This is that simplified NSX interface. This is where you have your NSX interfaces show up. You don't have to be super savvy on NSXT unless you are, right? This is where you can configure your DHCP server. I don't have anything configured here. You could do a relay as well. This is some port mirroring. You could set up some troubleshooting without having to know all the NSXT clicking here, there, everywhere. This is kind of the DNS zones and DNS services you can configure. So what we've done is we've exposed NSXT to their ARM APIs, the Azure Resource Manager APIs, and we've allowed for an easier way for admins to come in here and administer the service. I'm not going to focus on these too much. This is where you'd see like Azure Monitor Metrics. These are some of the automation pieces and the resource health, right? So it's just like a lot of the Azure resources that get deployed. Let's go back into the resource itself. Let me go into the jump host. Oh, you know what? It dawned on me too. Okay, I still have it open. I was like, I don't remember exactly what I picked for the password for this. So I'm going to use the Bastion host. So there's no public IP attached here. This is where I will type in, let's see. And then I'll grab my password down here. I think that's what it is. Da-da-da. And now, so what we're in a VM that lives in Azure that we've accessed behind the Azure Bastion, which is just a secure way to access your environments without having to put a public IP on a VM in Azure. So it's a great way to SSH into your Linux hosts, RDP into your Windows hosts. It's all handled in the browser as well. So it's over port 443. This gets a lot of customers super excited because it's a very secure way of locking your environment down. So this is the vSphere instance itself. So let me do some copying and pasting. Oh, it remembers that it was there. Oh, come on. I think it's because it needs to be updated. Let me try it again. It's been a busier week than I anticipated. Whoops, that's not what I want. Hang on. We'll go to let's go here to identity. This is the web URL. Here we are. We'll go into the environment. I will grab the password from over here. And boom, you're inside of your AVS environment. So you see there are 3 hosts that are tied to the subscription that this is deployed in. They've got their own naming convention, right? As an administrator, I shouldn't care as much about the naming convention. This is a service that is kind of like a PaaS service, but there's some IaaS-esque components. But Microsoft handled all of this through automation. So they built out the SDDC data center, the cluster 1. You can see here that these are Dell EMC servers. The reality here is too, we could always pick a different hardware vendor. So that shouldn't be something that really factors into your decision if you were to pick it or not pick it. But that's just the vendor that we've used right now for the AV36 nodes. And then if you go in here to the vSAN data store, these are all the different servers that get deployed. And you can't see them in the host view, but you've got your HCX manager, your NSX app 1, app 2, app 3. These are essentially making up your NSXT manager. This is your vCenter appliance. And I am not quite sure what EVM 1 is. This is the first time I have seen it. So I literally deployed this, I want to say it was like 2 weeks ago, and I haven't had a chance to go back in here and do a lot of digging and documenting. But all of this was built by way of me going in, specifying the subscription, specifying the resource group, determining the number of hosts, and kind of either tying it to a virtual network or not, and then adding a /22 CIDR network in. And all of this just built itself within about 2.5 hours. So it's a really cool solution. I just haven't had enough time to build any more demos outside of the bare bones of this is what it looks like when it's deployed and up in Azure. I think what I'll do here is, let's see, how do I stop? Man, I tell you what, I spend too much time on Teams. That's not new share. So how do I, do you want to just, oh, I see it now. Hello, it's right here. Stop share.
Yeah, stop share.
That's what it's, and I'm like, I'm making it way too hard.
Wow, I feel like I just have been drinking from a fire hose.
I know you said 30 minutes. So I was
Yeah.
like, I'm going to make this the biggest, most densest fire hose. For
Oh,
30
that was very information dense. That was awesome.
Yeah, I've
Very,
done it.
yeah, it was very good. Very interesting.
It's a really cool solution in the sense that, you know, like we always do all of these great SDKs for developers, right? We always help them out to make use of all of the Azure services, but we really don't for the sysadmins. And I feel like this is an awesome, compelling story for the sysadmins that are like, I don't have time to go and learn something new because I'm always dealing with something screeching, you know, coming to a screeching halt in production.
Right, right. Well, it's interesting, the partnership with VMware too. I find that to be an interesting thing.
Oh, I know. And they have a whole team of solution architects that are focused on this on the VMware side. And there's massive sales motions inside of VMware to partner up with all of the cloud vendors. So you might have seen that it's on GCP now as well as AWS.
Yeah, no, it's very interesting. Very interesting stuff. So I guess the question is, should we terminate the recording and go to the NetV Pro after hours so we can ask our real questions? Or
Sure. Sure.
all right, I'll stop recording.